I always thought I knew my son. We shared mornings over coffee, late nights talking about dreams, and quiet moments in the living room with our favorite music playing softly. I never imagined that behind my back, he could orchestrate something so cruel. It started innocently enough, or so I believed. My rare art collection had been my pride for decades, pieces collected from trips, auctions, and private sellers. Each painting, each sculpture, held a memory, a story I was sure my family respected. One evening, a casual mention from a gallery owner sent a chill down my spine. "Funny," he said. "I thought someone else owned that Monet." My heart stopped. My mind raced. How could this happen? Who would dare? I had to find out, and that's when the trail led me straight to him. My son. The one person I trusted most had betrayed me in the worst way imaginable. If you've ever been blindsided by someone you loved, stay with me. This story isn't just about theft. It's about discovering a secret that could change everything. From the day he was born, I watched him grow with pride. We celebrated every small victory, from school projects to his first job. My son, Michael, was sharp, ambitious, and charming. People admired him, and I often wondered if his talents came from me. Our home was filled with laughter and art. Paintings lined the walls, sculptures stood proudly in corners, and each piece reminded me of a life built with patience and passion. Michael loved art too, or at least I thought he did. He often commented on brush strokes, color choices, the mood of a piece. I trusted him around these treasures. But subtle things began to unsettle me. A missing postcard here, an odd question there, whispers of interest in selling pieces for quick money. I brushed them off. After all, teenagers and young adults are curious. That's normal, right? Then came the day I noticed the empty space where my prized Van Gogh had been. Panic surged through me. I checked the ledgers, the inventory, everything meticulously recorded. It was gone. My heart sank, but I had to stay calm. I had to understand why. As I dug deeper, inconsistencies emerged. Receipts, emails, messages, each one a breadcrumb leading to Michael. The betrayal wasn't just a lapse in judgment. It was calculated, deliberate, and it cut deeper than any words could. I needed to confront him, but first I needed the truth. And as I prepared to face him, I had no idea that one painting, one overlooked piece, would hold the key to everything. The days that followed were a blur of disbelief and quiet fury. I watched Michael closely, noting every glance, every hesitation. He acted normal, laughed at my jokes, helped around the house, but I knew the mask he wore was thin. I started piecing together the timeline. Emails to galleries, phone calls in hushed tones, receipts for transfers I had never authorized. Each small detail painted a bigger picture. My son had sold my collection piece by piece, not out of necessity, not out of desperation. This was calculated, precise, and personal. I confronted him one evening in the study. The room smelled of old paper and turpentine, the very scents that once brought me comfort. "Michael, we need to talk," I said, keeping my voice steady. His eyes flickered, that familiar charm faltering for just a second. "About the Monet?" I asked. He hesitated. The truth hovered between us, unspoken but undeniable. Then, with a half-hearted shrug, he said, "It's just art. People buy and sell all the time. Don't take it so personally." I wanted to scream, to shake him, to demand that he understand the gravity of his betrayal. But instead, I stayed calm. Because I had already begun to notice something he hadn't anticipated. A clue in the paperwork, a tiny discrepancy in the inventory, one painting, overlooked, unmentioned, untouched. It was a minor piece, one I had never considered valuable to anyone else. But now, in retrospect, it seemed deliberate. Whoever sold the collection wanted me to overlook this one, and that was the key. That single painting would reveal the truth in a way nothing else could. I spent nights cross-referencing gallery records, auction logs, and shipment manifests. Every lead pointed to Michael, yet the untouched painting seemed to mock him, silently waiting. It wasn't just a piece of art. It was a message, a secret buried in plain sight. I realized then that the betrayal had been reckless, but my patience was a weapon, and as I stood in the dim light of my study, I made a vow. I would uncover the hidden truth in that painting. I would expose the plan, not with anger, but with the careful precision of someone who had been wronged and refused to be defeated. Michael didn't know it yet, but the storm had already begun, and the first strike was hidden in the brushstrokes of a forgotten masterpiece. I couldn't stop thinking about that painting. It wasn't large or flashy, just a small landscape I had acquired at a modest auction years ago. I had never considered it important. But now, after Michael sold nearly everything else, it became the centerpiece of my plan. Somehow, I knew it held the key, not because of the artwork itself, but because of what was hidden within it. The next morning, I asked Michael to help me reorganize the collection. I wanted to be near him, to observe every gesture, every flicker of guilt, and to guide him unknowingly toward the moment of truth. He laughed, relaxed, unaware of the storm building around him. "It's just cleaning, Dad," he said casually, moving canvases aside. But I noticed his hesitation when we reached the untouched painting. I carefully removed it from the wall. "Funny," I said, pretending to be casual. "I don't remember seeing this one sold." He shrugged, avoiding my gaze. "Maybe I just forgot to list it," he muttered. That small slip of honesty was all I needed. I studied the painting under the light, turning it this way and that. At first glance, it was nothing remarkable. A quiet countryside, soft hills, a river winding through trees. But then I noticed it. The corner of the canvas seemed slightly raised, uneven. My pulse quickened. Carefully, I lifted the corner. Inside the hidden flap, I found a folded envelope, yellowed with age, tucked away like a secret waiting for discovery. My hands trembled as I pulled it out. Inside were documents, a contract, signatures, and a bank statement. And then it hit me. The truth that would unravel everything Michael thought he had gotten away with. The documents revealed a hidden clause in the collection's ownership. Legally, I had retained full rights to every piece regardless of any sale my son attempted. Worse for him, there was a financial safety net tied to the collection. Any unauthorized sale automatically triggered a reversal, with penalties so severe that galleries and buyers were obligated to return the artwork. Michael hadn't read the fine print, hadn't realized that in selling my pieces, he had triggered a legal trap that could ruin him. I felt a mix of relief and righteous anger. This was my moment. I called him into the room, my voice steady but controlled. "Michael, we need to talk about this," I said, laying the envelope on the table. He leaned over, curious, and that's when I saw the first flicker of fear. "What is that?" he asked, trying to keep his tone casual, but his eyes betrayed him. "Do you remember the painting you didn't sell?" I asked. "The one you thought was worthless?" I opened the envelope slowly, letting the papers fall into view. Turns out it wasn't worthless at all. It's the key to everything you've been trying to hide. He stepped back instinctively, realization dawning too late. "Wait, what does this mean?" His voice was tight, defensive. "It means," I said, taking a deep breath to steady myself, "that every piece you sold, every deal you thought you got away with, is legally reversed. The galleries you contacted, the buyers, they're all legally required to return the artwork, and any money you received will be reclaimed." I paused, letting the weight of the moment sink in. "You didn't just betray me, Michael. You triggered your own undoing. He sank into the chair, face pale. I could see the shock, the panic, the dawning comprehension that the careful plan he thought he had executed flawlessly was crumbling. I didn't know, he stammered. You didn't know because you never cared to check, I said softly but firmly. You assumed you could take and I would never notice. But you underestimated patience, attention to detail, and the truth hidden in plain sight. That painting, the one you ignored, the one you thought was useless, it saved everything. He buried his face in his hands. For a moment I felt a twinge of sadness. This was my son. But betrayal had consequences, and he needed to understand that. I continued, voice calm but unwavering. Michael, this isn't just about art. It's about trust. You broke it. But the law and a little foresight have restored it. The secret you overlooked, my careful record-keeping, they've brought justice without me having to yell, without me having to fight physically. Sometimes, the quietest power is the strongest. He looked up at me, eyes red and filled with a mix of guilt and fear. I didn't mean to. I thought I was helping us, maybe making a name for myself. I know, I said, softening slightly. And that's why this is also a lesson. Ambition without respect, without understanding, leads to ruin. You had all the opportunity to ask, to learn, to be honest. Instead, you chose deception. The silence that followed was heavy, but it was necessary. I had expected him to react angrily, to argue, maybe even to leave, but he didn't. He realized the gravity of the situation and the inevitability of the consequences. I picked up the painting, the envelope still tucked beneath the frame. This stays in my care, I said, and you will have to make amends. Every piece you sold will return. Every buyer will be contacted. And yes, there are penalties you must face. He nodded slowly, understanding that the lesson had been delivered. But beyond the punishment, there was relief too. Relief that the collection was safe, that the trust I had thought lost forever had been restored, at least in part. As I hung the painting back on the wall, I realized something else. The true power wasn't in catching him. The true power was in knowing, in patience, in letting him reveal himself through his own actions. That hidden painting was more than art. It was justice disguised as a quiet landscape, a secret waiting for the right moment to speak. And in that quiet room, surrounded by the restored collection, I finally felt a sense of calm. Michael had betrayed me, yes, but the truth had a way of emerging. And sometimes the smallest details, the ones we overlook, carry the greatest weight. This was just the beginning. The collection was safe, but the lessons would last a lifetime. And the secret painting, it had given me everything I needed to set things right. I thought the storm had passed after confronting Michael, but I was wrong. The real work, the real unraveling, had only just begun. Once the truth of that hidden painting came to light, a quiet resolve settled over me. I wasn't driven by anger anymore. I was driven by clarity, and clarity is a powerful thing. The first step was contacting every gallery, every buyer, every curator who had unknowingly taken part in Michael's scheme. The contracts hidden behind that painting gave me complete authority. Reversing the transactions wasn't just possible, it was mandatory. Still, it wouldn't be easy. Some buyers resisted, others were confused, a few were furious. But the law was on my side, and the paper trail Michael ignored became my shield. I remember calling the first gallery. A woman answered, her tone polite but cautious. We were told the piece was legitimately offered, she insisted. I calmly explained the clause, sent the documents, and waited. Minutes later, her voice changed completely. Sir, we had no idea. And with that, the process began. Piece by piece, The collection returned, slowly but surely. Michael watched it happen, day by day. I could see the weight settling on him, the realization that his plan, the one he believed would give him leverage, money, maybe even control, was collapsing under the truth. And yet he didn't argue. He didn't lash out. Instead, he retreated into himself, quiet, distant, almost hollow. One evening, he approached me in the living room, where I was inspecting one of the returned paintings. "Dad," he said hesitantly, "I want to fix this." I looked up, unsure of what he meant. Fixing it wasn't simple. "How do you plan to fix Betrayal, Michael?" I asked softly. He swallowed hard. "Let me help undo everything. Let me contact the remaining buyers. Let me explain." His voice cracked, and for the first time since everything began, I saw genuine remorse. But remorse wasn't enough. Not yet. "Before you help me," I said, "you need to understand what you actually did. You didn't just sell art. You dismantled trust. You took pieces of my life, my memories, and traded them away without asking. Fixing that takes more than emails and apologies." He nodded slowly, eyes downcast. "I know." But he stayed, and that mattered. Over the next week, Michael worked beside me. Not because I needed him to, but because he needed to see the consequences firsthand. He listened to angry buyers. He wrote formal apologies. He spent hours on the phone, explaining, clarifying, admitting fault. Each conversation chipped away at his pride, revealing a humility I hadn't seen in years. Still, something wasn't adding up. The sales themselves were reckless, yes, but the organization behind them, the timing, the secrecy, it felt too coordinated for him alone. And the deeper I looked, the more a pattern emerged. Larger payments routed through a secondary account, shipments arranged through third parties, documentation altered in ways far beyond Michael's skill. Someone else was involved. One afternoon, while reviewing another returned invoice, I noticed a familiar name buried in the logistics. Daniel, my nephew, Michael's cousin, a young man who had always hovered on the edge of trouble, always looking for shortcuts, always chasing fast money. And suddenly, everything sharpened. When I confronted Michael about it, he froze. His silence was confirmation enough. "Michael," I said cautiously, "how much of this was your idea, and how much was his?" He lowered his head, shame washing over him. "It started with me wanting quick money," he admitted. "But Daniel, he knew people who could move things faster. He said it would be easy. He said no one would notice." He paused, voice growing small. "I didn't think he'd push it so far." I closed my eyes for a moment. Betrayal from my son was painful. Betrayal involving another family member. That cut even deeper. But now, everything made sense. The missing shipping manifests, the hidden payments, the strangely coordinated sales. Michael had opened the door, but Daniel had walked through it with confidence, pushing him further than he ever intended to go. And that changed everything. Revenge wasn't just about restoring what was stolen anymore. It was about exposing the full truth. Every player, every lie, every hidden thread. "Michael," I said quietly, "we're not done. Not until every person involved faces the consequences." He nodded, understanding the gravity. We gathered evidence, messages, bank transfers, scheduled pickups, everything pointing to Daniel. We organized it neatly, chronologically, undeniably. Michael watched as the truth formed a narrative he could no longer escape from, a story even he couldn't rewrite. Then came the hardest part, confronting Daniel. We met him at a cafe, a neutral place with no memories attached. He walked in confident, smiling, unaware that the game was already over. But the moment he saw the folder on the table, the smile faltered. "What's this?" he asked, trying to play it off. "The truth," I said simply. The next hour was a storm of excuses, lies, half-admissions, attempts to twist the story. But every time he tried to escape responsibility, another piece of evidence closed the door on him. And when he realized he was cornered, truly cornered, the mask fell. "Fine," he snapped. "Maybe I helped, but Michael wanted this. He asked for it." Michael inhaled sharply, guilt and anger clashing in his expression. I held up a hand to stop him. "This ends now. You manipulated my son and he let you, but neither of you get to hide from the consequences." Daniel scoffed, but the fear in his eyes told the real story. By the time the meeting ended, it was clear. He was out of moves, and justice, slow but unstoppable, was finally catching up. Walking back to the car, Michael looked at me with a mix of relief and exhaustion. "What happens next?" he asked. I exhaled deeply. "Next, we finish what we started, and then we deal with the final cost." But part of me already knew the true reckoning wasn't with galleries or buyers. It was with Michael himself. The days after confronting Daniel felt strangely calm, almost quiet in a way that made me uneasy. Everything was out in the open now. The betrayal, the manipulation, the greed. And yet the real reckoning still sat between me and Michael like a shadow waiting for its moment. The art collection was almost fully returned. The buyers compensated, the legal contracts enforced. But the final cost wasn't financial. It was personal. Michael walked around the house differently now. Slower, more thoughtful. He avoided rooms where the paintings once hung, almost as if the empty spaces whispered reminders of what he'd done. I didn't push him. I wanted him to feel the silence. Sometimes silence teaches more than any lecture ever could. But eventually we had to talk. One night we sat in the kitchen long after midnight. No lights, just the glow of the street lamp spilling through the window. Michael stared at his hands, searching for the courage to speak. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red. "Dad, I don't expect forgiveness," he said quietly. "I just hope one day you'll see that I'm trying." His voice cracked on that last word. Trying. It wasn't enough, but it mattered. "I know you're trying," I said slowly. "But trying isn't the same as understanding. What you did, it wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. And choices have consequences." He nodded, tears slipping down his face. "I know." I let the moment stretch. I wanted him to feel the weight of everything, not to punish him, but to make the lesson unforgettable. "You let someone else guide your decisions," I continued. "You let greed cloud your judgment. You let Daniel convince you that shortcuts were easier than honesty. And that path, it always ends the same." Michael wiped his eyes. "I'm done with shortcuts," he whispered. I believed him, not because of his words, but because of the effort he had shown in the last week. The apologies, the calls, the hours spent repairing damage he caused. That kind of work changes a person. Still, there was one final step. The galleries had returned almost everything. The legal penalties for unauthorized sales were already in motion. And Daniel? He was facing consequences far more serious than he expected. Fraud investigations, financial charges, and the collapse of every connection he once bragged about. Now it was time for Michael to face his own accountability beyond paperwork and regret. "Tomorrow," I said, exhaling slowly. "You're coming with me to meet the last gallery owner, the most important one, the one who bought the Van Gogh." His eyes widened. "Dad, that man hates me." "He doesn't hate you," I corrected calmly. "He hates what you tried to become. There's a difference. And tomorrow, you're going to face him, look him in the eye, and explain exactly what happened." He swallowed hard, fear flickering in his expression. "What if he doesn't accept it?" "Then you learn something valuable," I replied. "That forgiveness isn't guaranteed, and that's part of the consequence you earned." The next morning we drove in silence. When we arrived at the gallery, Michael hesitated before pushing the door open. The owner, Mr. Harrington, stood near the window, examining a sculpture. He turned slowly, eyes cold, but not cruel. "Back again?" he asked, gaze shifting to Michael. Michael took a breath, stepped forward, and bowed his head. I came to apologize," he said. "I lied. I acted selfishly. And I hurt people who trusted me. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just needed to say it." The room went still. Mr. Harrington studied him for a long moment. Then, to my surprise, he nodded. "Integrity isn't measured by never making mistakes," he said. "It's measured by what you do after them. You've started your path back. Don't abandon it." Michael almost collapsed from relief. And for the first time, I felt the tension in my chest loosen. When we walked out, Michael let out a shaky breath. "Thank you for making me come." "I didn't make you," I said. "You chose to walk in." He didn't reply, but the way he straightened his posture told me everything. Back home, the final pieces of the collection were delivered. When the last crate arrived, I stood in the hallway and watched Michael help the movers carry it in. His movements were careful, precise, respectful, a far cry from the careless ambition that had started all of this. Later that evening, he approached me again. "Dad, what happens now?" I looked around the room, at the restored collection, at the painting that had saved it all, at the son standing before me, humbled but determined. "Now," I said slowly, "you rebuild. One decision at a time, one day at a time." "And us?" he asked, voice small. I stepped closer and put a hand on his shoulder. "Trust takes time, but I'm willing to walk that road if you are." Michael nodded, tears forming again. But this time, they weren't from guilt. They were from relief. As the night settled over the house, I realized something important. Revenge wasn't about destroying my son. It was about restoring the truth, exposing manipulation, and forcing responsibility where it belonged. Justice had been done, and now we were moving toward something better. Not perfect, not simple, but real. And sometimes that's enough. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. Stories like this aren't just entertainment. They're reminders of how fragile trust can be, how easily family lines can blur, and how powerful accountability truly is. Stay with us for the next story. You won't want to miss it.